theyeshiva.net.
It's a big cover tonight. Rabbi Jacobson, he was by Ozzy and Rachel last year. He was unreal as he is. International. There isn't a group of people that this Morad Yasra, that this Rav, this Gaon can't speak to. Tonight's shir is dedicated, one, L'Zecha Nishmas, Azri ben Ovadia Yaish, Ran's father, who died a few weeks ago. Azri ben Ovadia Yaish. And a Refuah Shlema. Rav David Feinstein, our rabbinic advisor, Rav David ben Shima, he should have a Refuah Shlema. And Azi's grandfather, Rav Yosef ben Mariasha Karasik. We should have a Refuah Shlema, we should have a Zecha Nishmas, and we should be Zoche to see the end of all these situations with the COVID. Please, a covered Rav, Harav Jacobson.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much, Rabbi Katz, for your very kind words. And thank you to everybody who is gathered here from wherever you are in the comfort of your homes. And I do have to say that this is actually the first lecture that I am privileged to give since the coronavirus pandemic began. When was it? Purim, so Nisan, Iyar, Sivan. Almost 5 months, literally almost 5 months to the day. So for the last 5 months, I have been talking a lot, fortunately or unfortunately, but from the privacy of my own home, using the miracles of modern technology to communicate with our brothers and sisters the world over. But Rabbi Marty Katz decided that this time I have to actually show up at the special home of Ozzy and Rachel Mandel, where we had the event last year with hundreds and hundreds of people. Every nook and cranny in the home was occupied by another soul. And when Rabbi Katz insists and requests, it's very hard to say no. So here I am. I finally got out of my house, got out of my cocoon, and I have this wonderful couple, Ozzy and Rachel, right in front of me, together with our great video producers, and together with all of you. Socially, we're distant, but emotionally and spiritually, we're one. So thank you for the privilege, the invitation, and the opportunity to address such an extraordinary evening dedicated to just one life. There's an old anecdote that they tell about a couple living in New York who unfortunately struggled with infertility. They were married for years without children, and one day a great rabbi and Kabbalist came to town, and the couple went for a blessing. Can you please pray to God that we are blessed with a child? And he says, tonight I'm returning to Israel. Please write your names and your mother's names on a note. I'm going to go to Jerusalem, to the Kotel, to the Western Wall, and I'm going to place your note into the wall, and I'll pray there for you to Hashem. Great. They give their names on this little note, this little kvittel, and off he goes. 5 years later, this Israeli rabbi comes back to town. He's walking in the street, and he sees the woman he met 5 years ago. He was hesitant. He didn't know, should he ask, should he not ask? It may be an uncomfortable situation. But he said hi. He greeted her warmly, and he said, how are things? How is life? She says, amazing, incredible. He's like, have you been blessed with a child? And she says, 1 child? We have been blessed with 10 children. He's like, 10 children? I was here 5 years ago, and you didn't have a child. She said, well, it was amazing. We sent that note to the Kotel, and you know what? Within that year, I was blessed with triplets. The next year, twins. Then we decided we need a little break. So we took a break. The next year, twins. And the following year, triplets. We now have a minyan of children in our home. And the rabbi literally starts dancing. Shechiyanu, v'kimanu, v'giyanu, lizbana. That is so exciting. It's amazing. It's incredible. Where's your husband? I need to give him a mazel tov and a kiss and a hug and an embrace. She says, actually, my husband is out of town. He says, where is he? He went to Israel, pre-corona. he went to Israel. Wow, that's so nice. What's in Israel? He went to Yerushalayim. Why did he go to Yerushalayim? He went to the Kotel. What's at the Kotel? He wants to find the note and take it out of the wall. Which of course, I don't have such a big audience here to laugh, so I'm going to have to laugh on my own. But thank you for the laughter. Which of course underscores the fact that children are our greatest blessing in the world. Children also could be a challenge. Each child is a universe. Each child has his or her distinctive psychological, emotional, physical, social, spiritual, academic, genetic needs. And children bring the best out in parents. They challenge us, they stimulate us, they trigger us. But if we are attuned to them, they enhance us, they expand our horizons, and they turn us into the people that we're capable of becoming. It reminds me of the beautiful commentary of the Netziv, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the Rosh Hashiva and Rabbi of Volozhin in Lithuania, who writes, why does the firstborn child get a double portion of the inheritance? Pi Shnayim, as the Torah says in Parshas Kiseitzi in Deuteronomy. Why? And he says something very, very moving. He says, because with the birth of that first child, a husband and a wife were transformed from just being individuals, even from being a couple, to becoming a mommy and a tati. And that completely transforms a person's identity. Till then, I was an individual. Even if we're married, we were connected. Two adults were connected to each other. But now, a whole new identity, a second identity. That's why a double portion. And I always thought about the fact, on Rosh Hashanah, we celebrate the anniversary of creation. The reading of the Torah of every holiday is always conveying the theme of that Chag, of that Yom Tov. Pesach, we read the Torah portions about the story of Pesach. And the same is true with Sukkot and Chanukah. We read about the dedication of the Mishkan. And Purim, we read about the war against Amalek. Every Yom Tov, we talk about the theme of that holiday. What should have we read on Rosh Hashanah? If you had to establish the reading of the Torah on Rosh Hashanah, which portion would have you chosen? Well, don't all answer at once. But the answer I would give is Genesis 1:1. Bereshis, bara Elohim, es hashemayim. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. You want to discuss the sixth day? Hashem said, let us make Adam. He creates Adam. He creates Chava. Shabbos comes, and that's Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of creation and the anniversary of the creation of Adam and Chava. We say it in the davening. Zeh hayom tchilas ma'asecha hayom haras olam. This is the birthday of the world. We don't mention anything of this in the reading of Rosh Hashanah. What do we read about on Rosh Hashanah? The anniversary of creation. Well, we read about the birth of children. We read about the birth of Yitzchak. We read about the birth of Yishmael. We read in the Haftarah about the birth of baby Shmuel to Chana, who couldn't have children. Second day we read about Rachel Mavakal B'neh Rachel crying for her children. Why aren't we reading about the theme of Rosh Hashanah? Of course, my dearest friends, brothers and sisters, it's because how do Jews celebrate the creation of the universe? How do we tune in to the miracle of existence? How do we take in the inspiring fact that we're alive and that we're celebrating life? It's by focusing on our children. On Rosh Hashanah, all the readings and all the haftarahs focus on the child. I want to share with you a story that I heard from a family member just a few days ago. He's a rabbi in Rishon LeZion in Israel, a friend of mine. His name is Rabbi Shneir Ashkenazi, the rabbi of the community there. And he shared a story. He said he was a little kid. It was 35 years ago, 2 days before Sukkot. He was home. His father, who already passed away, his name was Reb Mandel Ashkenazi Zechrono Livracha, was the rabbi of a little town near Tel Aviv called Kfar Chabad. It used to be called Sefaria. It's called today Kfar Chabad. His father was the rabbi, Reb Mandel Ashkenazi. Two women walk into the house. One he knew, she was from the neighborhood. The other one he never met. They were both sobbing. The story that she shared with his father, he was again a little kid, and I guess he was eavesdropping to hear the conversation. She tells his father, Rabbi Ashkenazi, she's a young girl. She comes from a fine, or a seemingly fine, religious, observant Jewish family in Israel. Traumas, mistakes, errors, addictions. She got involved in, let's call it destructive behavior. She's pregnant. She just found out she's a single girl, very, very religious Torah family. She's pregnant. And she tells the rabbi of Kfar Chabad, if my father finds out that I am pregnant, he will literally kill me. I am scared for my life. I scheduled an abortion for tomorrow, Erev Sukkot, so that I can come home for the holidays and not be worried that in a few weeks or a month or two, things will become noticeable. Not only will the baby be dead, I will also be dead. And the poor girl, religious family in Israel is sobbing, and this other woman who's older is sobbing. And the rabbi looks at both of them. And the first thing you do as a Jew, what does Rabbi Marty do? The first thing you do is you buy time, right? You buy time. He looks at them and he says, okay, I understand. Let's just reschedule the abortion for a day after Simchas Torah. Nothing will happen. It will not become noticeable during the next few days of Sukkot. You're fine. You're safe. Let's just push it off till after Simchas Torah. Nothing will happen. She agreed. He thought, let me buy time. Let me think about this. Chol Hamoyed Sukkot. He comes to Shul, to daven Shachris, and he sees a Jew who lives in Lyon, in France. He happens to be the Chabad ambassador, the Chabad Shliach in Lyon for many years. His name is Reb Shmuel Gurevich. He came for Chol Hamoyed Sukkot to Israel, and he's davening there in Shul. The rabbi has a thought, goes over to him, says, listen, I have a crisis. There's a girl, she became pregnant, messy story. She's frightened. She's determined to go through with an abortion. We got to help her, and we got to save the fetus. That's what we Jews do for each other. I need you to help me to find a place in Europe where this girl can stay for the next few months, 8 months, 9 months, until she gives birth. She can recuperate. We have to find a nice family who's looking to adopt a child and will treat this child well. And then this girl can recuperate and go back to Israel, and the baby does not have to be aborted. Without skipping a heart's beat, Rabbi Gurevich from Lyon tells Rabbi Ashkenazi in Israel, he says, Misudar, done. And indeed, a little while after the holidays, Rabbi Ashkenazi collects money. He didn't have money of his own. I knew him. He was pretty poor. He does not have affluent Jew. Collected money for the flight, put her on an airplane from Israel to France. Rabbi Gurevich set her up in the house. It was not an easy pregnancy. But the girl made it. She gave birth to a beautiful, healthy, little, angelic Jewish girl. She remained there for a little while. She recuperated. Officially, she was on a European trip. Teenagers go on their trips. She went back to Israel. There was a Jewish family in Lyon who couldn't have children. They wanted to adopt. They adopted this child, and they started to raise this girl in France. They were so kind and generous. A few times a year, they would sponsor a trip, a flight, for the mother, for the biological mother, to come see her biological child. And she did so year after year after year, because they felt that it would be healthier for everybody, even if she wasn't capable of raising this kid. At least the child should know who his biological mother is, and who her biological mother is. And this girl was raised in Chabad educational schools, institutions in Lyon, France. She became older. This happened 35 years ago, remember. She's a teenager. She makes her first trip to Israel, where she's going to meet her biological mother. But before that, she makes another trip. She goes to Kfar Chabad, and she walks into the house of the Rabbi and the Rebbetzin. She walks in, she meets Rebbetzin Ashkenazi. Her son is telling me the story. Falls on her neck, embrace each other. They're crying, they're laughing, they're singing, they're dancing. She thanks the father, the husband, and the wife, who quite literally saved her life, her mother's life. And she says, I know that I don't only have to thank you for great things you have done for me, but I have to thank you for my very existence, for the fact that I saw the light of day, for the fact that I was not snuffed out when I was still in the womb of my mother. It was a very, very special and unique encounter. And then she went back to France to be with her family who adopted her to continue her education. And life moves on. Corona comes. A corona COVID-19 pandemic, uncertainty. All the shuls closed down, all the schools closed down, all the malls closed down, the stadiums closed down, the theaters closed down, the clubs, the bars, offices, every industry is impacted, every shopping center, everything closes down. Jews like to daven with a minyan. So I know different communities had different standards. In Montreal, the rabbi of Kfar Chabad's son, his name is Rabbi Chaim Ashkenazi, he's a teacher in a yeshiva in Montreal, at Talmud Chacham, he's a teacher. The regular shul he went to on Shabbos was closed, he couldn't go. But for Pesach, he wanted to daven with a minyan. Near his house, there was some shul that they made, social distancing, a small minyan. There was right nearby a Sephardic shul, so the Sephardim over there in that shul, they made a little minyan outdoors, and this was close to his house, so he went to join them with the proper social distancing. His neighbor, and of course a neighbor today means, 10, 20 feet away, is sitting there, and being gavra legavi, you got to schmooze a little bit, find out who your neighbor is. Shalom aleichem, aleichem shalom, what's your name? And the Sephardic Jew tells him his name. What's your name? He says, my name is Ashkenazi. Ashkenazi, yeah. Israel, Kfar Chabad, yeah. Your father was the rabbi, Olav Hashalom, Reb Motel, Reb Mordechai Ashkenazi. Yeah, that was my father. He says, you won't believe it. You know who I married? I married a Jewish girl from France who was born because of your father and your mother. And I want to tell you something. My wife just had a baby boy. And the bris is going to have only 3 people attending. Me, my wife, and the moil. Everybody knows if you were part of the brisin in the last few months, it's very nice to have a great oilam by a bris and a minyan and a lot of people, but health comes first, and halachically you can have a bris without a minyan, you just have to have a baby, you have to have somebody to hold the baby, and you have to have the bris, and the Leo Anovi comes despite corona. So a lot of brisin happened with a tati and a mami, tati holding the baby, the moil doing what he has to do, and the simcha happens. And he turns to this young Rabbi Ashkenazi, and he says, I'm about to make the bris. We're going to make the bris in a few days, just me and my wife, and I ordered the moil. My wife told me how she would have wished that your father would have been the sandik to hold this child during the bris. After all, he is the spiritual father of me. He's the spiritual grandfather of this child. But 2 things, your father passed away young, relatively speaking, and it's corona. Nobody's coming from Israel, even if he would be alive. And then he looks at him and he says, but we've just met today. We've both been in Montreal, but we have never met. And this meeting happened so that you could come to the house and represent your father and hold the child at the bris, which is what happened just a few days later, this past Pesach, 2020, 5780. You heard the story I just said. I want you to take the story and multiply it 18,500 times. I am not going to stand here and share with you 18,500 stories for two reasons. First of all, we may be standing here together for 18,000 days or hours. Number two, I don't know 18,500 stories. I have some stories up my sleeve, but not 18,500 stories. But I want you to take this story that I shared with you, and in your mind, multiply this miracle 18,500 times, and then you will begin to understand the work of just one life. Because in the last 30 years, this story has repeated itself close to 20,000 times. Each family with its distinct crisis, challenges, financial, emotional, social, spiritual, mental, health-wise, physical. A single fetus, twins, triplets, sometimes quadruplets. And just one life moved in at the right moment when the question was, who shall live and who shall die? Mi yichya u'mi yamos. It is heartbreaking that in some societies today, abortion is seen as, nobody would like to do it, but if it's going to cause uncomfort to my life, we go ahead with it. The lightheadedness in which it's performed sometimes breaks our hearts. And I, for one, thank the Almighty and thank our brothers and sisters that we have a just one life, that we have a Rabbi Marty Katz, that we have all of the supporters and all of the friends and all of those who are just there for just one life. To remember that extraordinary dictum of the Mishnah and Sanhedrin, he or she who preserves one life preserves an entire world, and conversely. This week, I was giving a shiur in Rambam, the opening Rambam, Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, chapter 5, and I came across that incredible halacha. And the people attending, it was a live stream through Zoom. The people attending asked a very powerful question. It's based on a Mishnah in Trumos, Maseches Trumas, Perek Ches, and a Yerushalmi. Fascinating, tragic scenario, I guess, Tisha B'Av related. If an anti-Semite comes to a Jewish community and says, and I quote the words of our sages, Tnu lanu nefesh achas, v'nahargoi, v'im lav na'roiges kulchem. They come to a community, imagine 20,000 Jews live in this community. And these anti-Semites, these tyrants, these dictators, these vicious, malicious haters are well armed. And they come to this hopeless community and they say, we need one Jew and we'll kill him. Just one Jew. Give us one Jew. Just one life will be snuffed out. We need to take our revenge on one Jew. Pick your Jew. Could be an old man, could be an old woman, could be a frail, mortal, sick person. We don't care. Take a baby, take an infant, hasn't grown up, no deep relationships. We just need to kill one Jew. The alternative, we kill everybody. We will murder everybody. What do you say would be the halacha? What should be the halacha? You have 20,000 Jews whose lives are on the line. It could be 50,000. The halacha doesn't give numbers. It could be 1 million. And they want one. You know what Jewish law says? Yehargu kulam va'al yimseru nefesh achas mi Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom gives us a halacha. They must all allow themselves to die because they're not allowed to give over one Jewish soul to be killed. Of course, the best option would be if they call in the IDF and they get rid of them. That would be the best option, of course. But when there's no option, they're not allowed to hand over an innocent Jew, one Jew to be murdered. But where are the sociologists? Where are the people of statistics? Furthermore, what happens if they designate a Jew? They say, you know what? We want Yankel. We want Shmedel. We have an issue with Yankel and Shmedel. Yichadu. Rabbi Yochanan says, in this case, you're allowed to give him over. Because he's the target. He is the target. Rabbi Yochanan says, yeah, Rish Lakish says, no, and that's the halacha. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to. And the question is, Rabbi Isai, they're designating one Jew to kill. They're going to kill him anyway. I'm not going to give him over and save a community? How do we understand this? Is there any logic to it? Is it maybe a Gzeris HaKosov? Kesef Mishnah discusses there in Rambam, Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah Perek. It's a complex and very deep question. But if you watch the work of Just One Life over the last 18 years, you know the answer in your kishkas. You know the answer instinctively. The answer is, when it comes to life, Jews don't recognize statistics. When it comes to life, we don't operate on a level of numbers. We take very seriously the words that one life is a universe. That taking one life and snuffing out the soul from this life is not one life. It's a universe. It's history. Or to put it a little bit differently, maybe a little more abstract terms. If you talk about DNA which finds itself in every single cell, the genome which is present, the genetic code in every single cell, is equally present in my brain, in my heart, in my kidneys, but also in my hair, in my finger, in my saliva. And in each particle, in each tiny invisible cell, I can find that essential code, the blueprint for the entire organism. When you get down to the core of a Jew, when you get down to the etzem, to the atzmius, to the DNA of a Jew, one tiny little baby is Klal Yisrael. You don't say one person versus 50 million people. That's a numbers game. It's important in many issues. But when it comes to life, when it comes to the core of life, when it comes to the core of the neshama, taking one Jew and giving him up to die is like taking 15 million Jews and giving them up to die. Because Ayid is Klal Yisrael. In that one individual Jew, you have the essence of divinity. A Jew is a chelik, a soul is a chelik, Eloikam Ima. It's a piece of Hashem, it's a piece of infinity. You don't say, this is a small piece of infinity. It's not that valuable. If it's real infinity, its value is absolute, non-negotiable, unwavering. You can't play games with it. It's this philosophy, it's this consciousness, it's this idealism, it's this approach to life of one soul that has become the secret of our resilience, our hope, our treatment of life, our sense of sacredness of life. It's one of the good old anecdotes about 3 clergy who meet in Starbucks pre-corona for a coffee, for a latte. You have a rabbi, you have a priest, and you have a minister. And they're all sipping their latte, and what are they schmoozing? They're talking about what they would like to hear people say at their funeral. The priest says, I would love to hear somebody say at my funeral, he was a true servant of the Lord. He brought the light of the Lord into countless hearts. And the minister says, that's nice, but I would like to hear something else at my funeral. I'd love if somebody got up and said, he was a real friend. He was a true shepherd of his people. You could trust him, you could lean on him, you could rely on him. Rabbi, how about you? What would you like to hear someone say at your funeral? And the rabbi says, I think I would love if somebody would say, I think he's moving. Which of course embodies the truth of the words of Moshe Rabbeinu to all of his people in the last weeks of his life that we just started to read. Uvacharta b'chayim. Choose life. Do we need Moses to tell us to choose life? Who chooses death? We all choose life. Every animal, every insect, every fish, every bird, every reptile does anything to cling to life. Every bush, every shrub, every tree. This is part of our natural genetic instinct. We cling to life. We want to survive. We want to propagate. But Moshe perhaps knew about the very difficult future that his people may endure. And he knew that there may be cultures or religions who will develop a culture of death, almost a desire for martyrdom, a romanticizing martyrdom, and killing your enemy. And he told the Jews, no matter what happens to you, I want you always to choose life. I want you always to celebrate life. And this is indeed what happened. Through thick and thin, Tisha B'Av, the Jewish people were decimated. First Commonwealth, second Commonwealth, first Beis HaMikdash, second Beis HaMikdash. If you were a fly on the wall and you were watching it from an objective point of view, it seemed very obvious that Jewish history has been interesting, but at last the Jewish seed is gone. And yet, we remember those two words of Moshe, Ubacharta b'chayim. We chose life. And 75 years ago, as some survivors emerged from piles and piles, from mounds and mounds of ashes of 6 million of their brothers and sisters, the next day, they went to choose life. They married, they built families, they built communities, they built Israel, they built Judaism and the Jewish people in Israel and throughout the world. We heard the echo of Moses' words, Ubacharta b'chayim. Don't give up on the gift of life. Never surrender to despair. Never take life for granted. And always remember the absolute infinite value and gift of a single life, man and woman, young and old, and even that invisible fetus struggling to develop in the womb of its mommy. Remember how precious it is, and do anything you can to be there for it, to help nurture it and bring it to the fore. It was Yirmiyah Hanavi, the prophet of doom, the prophet who observed the destruction of Tisha B'Av, the one who wrote Megillas Eicha, the scroll of lamentations that Jews the world over read on Tisha B'Av at night and many in the morning as well. It was Yirmiyah Hanavi who cursed the day that he was born. And in Jeremiah, I think it's chapter 20, Yirmiyah Hanavi says, woe unto the person who notified my father that he had a child. And you know what he wishes for himself? He wishes that he would have been a stillborn. Yirmiyah says, I wish I would have died in the womb of my mother. Haras oilam rachma. I wish I would have remained eternally pregnant in the womb of my mother. Yirmiyah's life was so painful that he was basically wishing on himself that he was aborted, or that he never came to see the light of day because he would have been stillborn. This is a pasuk in Yirmiyah. This is how deep the pain and the despair that overtook Yirmiyah until the Rebbeinu Shalom comforted him, gave him hope. You can understand from this how difficult such moments were for the Jewish people. And despite all of this, Yirmiyah, thank God, came to see the light of day. He enriched the Jewish world, still enriches the Jewish world with some of his greatest prophecies, including that great promise of Hashem to Yirmiyah. Mini koilech mi bechi ve'enayich midima. Yesh socher lipulasek, yesh tichva la'acharisech, v'shavu banim ligvulam ne'um Hashem. Stop crying. God tells Rachel, Yirmiyah says, chapter 31, there is hope for your future. Your children will return to their borders. And in our generation, when we observe that extraordinary miracle, that today, 6.6 million Jews live in Israel, and the numbers are growing every single day. And even many of our dear American brothers and sisters who felt that America was the golden Medina, or as Sam Levinson, the great Jewish comedian, used to say, he said, my father came to America from Europe because they promised him that the roads in America are paved with gold. And Sam Levinson says, but then my father arrived to the United States and he discovered three things. First of all, he discovered that the roads of America were not paved with gold. Number two, he discovered that the roads of America were not paved at all. And then finally, he discovered number three, that he is the one who has to pave them. Sometimes we have been disappointed in history. America is and was a malchus shel chesed, a great haven for the Jewish people, no question. And we are deeply grateful to the founding fathers. We're grateful to the presidents of America. We're grateful to the president. We're grateful to all of the citizens of the United States of America for the freedom they have conferred upon so many minorities, including allowing the Jewish community right here and all over the place to flourish in such powerful places. But many Jews are now struck by anxiety, by concern, overtaken by fear. We always have to pray and hope that everything turns out in an extraordinary way. But I do recall today an insight that I heard from the former chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau Shlita. We were in the airport, I think it was a Kennedy airport, we were coming from California, and I heard something from him which he told me he heard from a predecessor of his, second chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha, who said that he heard it from the first chief rabbi of what was then Palestine, Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak HaKoyen Cook, Rav Cook, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha. The pasuk says in Yeshaya, Mi Eila Ka'ov Tu'ufena V'chayonim Al Arubai Sehem. When Mashiach comes, when the Geula comes, he's going to look at the Jewish people and say, who are all these Jews? They fly like the clouds and like doves returning to their dovecotes, their nests. That's how Jews will be flocking back to Eretz Yisrael when Mashiach comes. It's going to be like flying clouds and like flying doves going back to their little homes, to their residence, to their arubai sehem, their dovecotes. And Rav Kook asked the question, I think the Malbim already asks it, why this redundancy? Clouds flying and doves flying. And he said, there's a big difference. Clouds are moved by the wind. When there is a powerful scathing wind or storm, the clouds move, sometimes very swiftly, but involuntarily. The clouds never ask to be moved. They're compelled to move by the wind. What about the dove? The dove is not being forced to go back home. Doves are from the few birds who remain monogamous throughout their life. They're extremely loyal to their mate. They left the dovecote because they needed to bring food for the young. But their natural place is to go home. They go home not involuntarily. They go home with passion. This is my home. And Rav Yitzchak HaKoyen Cook said in the 1930s, and Rabbi Herzog repeated it, and I heard it from Chief Rabbi Lau a couple of years ago. Rav Cook said there are two types of Jews with two different types of relationships to Israel. There are Jews who essentially, they don't feel close to their people or to their homeland. But ka'av tu'ufena, sometimes clouds involuntarily are pushed back to their homeland. But then there are other Jews who go there because it's my home, it's my nest, it's my dwelling place. It's where my family is, it's where my mate is, where my neshama is, where the Shechina is, where my young are. And Rabbi Lau said, I came to Israel in 1945. You know why? Where should have I remained? In Buchenwald? Where should have I remained? I should have gone back to Pietrikov, to Poland. I had nowhere to go. I was like a cloud. I was pushed by the wind. My father was killed. My mother was killed. My siblings were killed. I had one brother who rescued me in Buchenwald with a sack. Where should I go? I was like a cloud. The cloud was pushed. I had nowhere to go. And then he tells me, he says, today is different. Today, thank God, Jews have a lot of places in the world where they're very comfortable. But they still visit Israel. People move to Israel. They send their children to Israel. They go to learn in Israel. They're like doves. It's because I want to be here. It's my home. It's my bias. And when Mashiach comes, B'karev Mamash, very speedily in our days, also two types of Jews. There are Jews who become Jews when they're reminded by the scathing winds of anti-Semitism, of hatred. We are like clouds. The storms of Jewish hatred push us into a corner, and we have to say, I'm Jewish and I support Israel. The prophet says, don't be like a cloud. Be like a dove. Be a leader. Be a passionate Jew. Care for your people. Love your land. Love your people. Fight for your people. Defend them. Don't be like a cloud. Don't be forced to the corner and then you say, oh, I have no choice. Do it with gusto, with enthusiasm, with passion, with love. Yirmiyah said the children will come back to their border, and today, when 6.6 million Jews came back to their homeland, and that number should not be taken for granted. Whenever I read the number, 6.6 million Jews living in Israel today, in contrast to 1948, 600,000 Jews. It always touches my heart very deeply. 6.6 million Jews living in Israel, and yet, with all of the struggles, many young women feel that they cannot allow for the child to come full term and see the light of day. And like Jeremiah before Tisha B'Av, they say, Haras Olam Rachma. I think we have to end this pregnancy in the land of Israel. And that's where just one life comes in and says, no, we will not give up on a soul, because giving up on a soul is giving up on a universe. It's giving up on an olam mole, on an entire world. We will do whatever we can to save, to rescue every single Jewish soul. And you know what I like about Rabbi Marty Katz and his friends and his chevra? He is colorblind. You know what I mean by colorblind? I'll tell you what I mean. Very often, we Jews become judgmental. I go into my little cocoon. If you look like me, if you dress like me, if you daven my nusach, if you believe everything I believe, I love you. But the moment I see that you deviate from my path, my mahalach, my chalois, my geder, my inyan, my nekuda, my hashkafa, my machshava, my type of shul, my nusach, I'm already uncomfortable with you. Narrowness is not the name of the game anymore. We need expansive Jews, not tunnel vision Jews. People, I remember I once read about the Panovich Rav Kahneman, Zechat Tzadok. He was a real Litvish Yid. He was a Lithuanian Jew. But he survived the Holocaust. He lost his wife and his children back in Panovich in Lithuania. He himself survived. He was on a fundraising trip. He remarried. He had more children. And he built so many institutions in Bnei Brak. I was reading his biography. He came to a Chanukah Sabayis of a Gerer Stiebel, a Gerer Shul. And he was so excited, he says, Heint wollte ich gewollt sein a Gerer Chassid. Today I want to be a Gerer Chassid. Then he went to a Chanukah Sabayis of Vishnitz. And he says, Heint bin ich a Vishnitz Chassid. The ability to be able to celebrate every single Jew. The ability to be able to be colorblind, to be able to see that what connects us is far more important and far more vital than what divides us. In this organization, there's no distinctions. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. If you were Jewish enough for Joseph Mengele to send you to the gas chambers, you're Jewish enough for you and I to love this person. You're Jewish enough for just one life to take care of you and take care of your baby. The judgmentalism, the sense of separation, of segregation. You're too religious for me, you're too secular for me, you're too right-wing for me, you're too left-wing for me. You're this direction, that direction. I don't like your glasses, I don't like your hat, I don't like where you daven, I don't like how you daven, I don't agree with this. Your opinions on Israel, your opinions on Trump, your opinions on anti-Trump, your opinions on Black Lives Matter. We have disagreements, so what? When true Jews meet, I say Shalom Aleichem, you say Aleichem Shalom. Why don't you say Shalom Aleichem? The answer is because when two Jews meet, they have to disagree. I say Shalom Aleichem, and you say, no, that's apikursis, it's Aleichem Shalom. Now that we established that we have a disagreement, maybe now we can have a peaceful conversation. If there's one lesson we have to learn from our history, my dearest friends, it's this. We don't have to agree with each other, but we have to be here for each other. We don't have to see eye to eye about everything, but we have to love each other. We don't have to possess the same hashkafa and Weltanschauung about every issue under the sun. In fact, disagreements are sometimes very healthy and consciousness expansive and expanding. But we have to support each other. I have to be able to lean on you. You have to be able to lean on me, not 90%, 100%. We have to be able to trust each other and care for each other. The downfall of a people is not when they disagree. It's like a couple. The downfall of a marriage is not when a Jewish couple disagrees. In fact, I do not know of one Jewish couple, maybe you guys, who don't disagree. And even those who don't, I don't know what happens privately. The only Jewish couples I know that are perfect are ones that I don't know. Who doesn't disagree? It's almost a biblical mitzvah that you disagree with your Jewish husband. Eselei Ezer Kenegdai, like the Nitziv says. Disagreements don't make or break a marriage. In fact, sometimes they could be a lot of fun, especially if you win the argument. Disagreements don't destroy a marriage. You know what destroys a marriage? When there's a lack of trust. When I start feeling that you disagree with me because you don't like me, that everything I say you have to say the opposite. When there's no trust, when I don't feel that you have my back, that you love me, that you care for me. The fact that you have a different perspective, so what? That's what makes everybody bigger and larger. I get to see life through your window, not only through my window. That's fine. But when I can't trust you anymore, when I don't feel that connection, that I could rely on you 1,000%, and you don't feel that about me, that's when we start drifting away emotionally. The same is true with the Jewish people. Shalom aleichem, aleichem shalom. Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik, Zechet Tzaddik Levracha, once said something very powerful. Tosfos says in Menachos, I think at 37, Gemara speaks about two heads, a baby with two heads. Do you put on tefillin, where you put on tefillin, etc. So Tosfos says it was a story, there was a kid who had two heads. It's a classic Jewish story. His father died, he left a lot of real estate on Madison Avenue probably, and he said, I have two heads, so I get double inheritance, because I'm two people, right? It's like Jackie Mason, who repeats a lot of my jokes, says, what's the definition of chutzpah? Somebody comes to the therapist because he has a split personality and then he wants a group discount. So this guy says, I have two heads, I want a double portion of the inheritance. So they come to Shlomo HaMelech. Tosfos tells the story. So Shlomo HaMelech says, blindfold him on one of the heads, blindfold the eyes, and then pour a hot cholent on the other head. Doesn't say cholent, hot water. If the head that's blindfolded screams, then we know it's one organism, it's one person. If the head that's blindfolded doesn't scream, then we know it's two separate people, and indeed he gets a double portion of Tati's real estate. What's the meaning of this story? So Rabbi Yoshe Ber, Rabbi J.B. Soloveitchik, Zecher Levracha, said something very profound. He said it's a metaphor for Jewish history. We don't have one head, we have many heads. We have different ways of looking at the world. That's not the problem. But when you pour hot water on one head, if the other head screams, we know that it's one person. If the other head doesn't scream, then we know it's not one person, it's two people. The fact that we have many heads does not constitute a crisis. But when hot water is poured on one head, the other head has to scream. Just one life embodies that type of unity, that type of trust, that type of camaraderie that the whole Jewish world yearns for. We are exhausted and tired of 1900 years of strife. We crave an era of real unity, of real harmony, of real trust. We don't have to agree with each other, but we have to be here for each other. So my dearest, dearest friends, I'm going to conclude with a very moving story about a Jew who some of you knew him. Saul Teichman in Los Angeles, California, who passed away not long ago and was known to the whole community as a person who had an open heart to any person in need. And somebody once asked him, Saul, why are you always giving everybody? Why does nobody leave your house empty-handed? And he shared a story that touched me very deeply. I came from Munkach, 1944. We were sent by the cattle cars to Auschwitz. I was born in 1927. I was on line. I didn't know at the end of the line there's a selection, and Joseph Mengele decides where to send you, to the right or to the left. Man came over to me. He had a beard, he had a yarmulke, but I didn't know him. He says, where are you from? So I'm from Munkach. When were you born? I said, I was born in 1927. He says, Narishkeiten. You were born in 1925. I said, no, I was born in 1927. He says, I remember your bris. You were born in 1925. I say, no, 1927. He says, how do you know? My father told me. You made a mistake. You didn't hear your father correctly. I was there when you were born in Munkach. You were born in 1925. I'm looking at this guy in Auschwitz waiting on the line, and he's arguing with me about my birthday. And at some point he says, trust me, you were born in 1925. And now I'm going to ask you the question again. When were you born? And I said, 1925. He looked at me and he said, remember, you were born in 1925. He disappears. A few moments later, I'm standing in front of Joseph Mengele, Yimach Shemai. He looks at me and he says, when were you born? And I said, 1925. And he motions with his thumb for me to go to the right, where I was taken to the barracks to work. A few hours later, I discovered that those who were born in 1927 or later automatically were sent immediately to the gas chambers. And I realized that this man, whom I never met, I did not know who he was, he claimed he was at my bris, literally was the angel who saved my life. And I'm here today, and I have a family because of him. And then Saul said, and some time ago I was thinking, what is my wish for myself in my life? And I said to myself, I had an angel who appeared at my feet in Auschwitz-Birkenau and took me out of death and brought me to life. I still don't know who that person was, but it's almost irrelevant. For me, he was a malach, he was an angel. And I said to myself, I want to be such an angel for other people. I want to be that angel for other people. Just like I had an angel who at those bleak moments, those darkest moments in history was there for me, I want to be able to be that angel so that other people, when they think back about the greatest moments of their lives, should know that they had an angel who was there for them to save their lives. And that's when I made a decision. Nobody's going to leave this home without encouragement, without love, without help, financially, emotionally, psychologically. Nobody will be left alone. I want to be an angel for others, as I have had an angel here for me. And I say to you, tonight, we have that opportunity. Each and every one of us at some point in our life had an angel. Somebody who was there for you in a difficult moment, in a time of crisis, when you needed a gesture, when you needed a piece of advice, you needed an embrace, you needed a smile, you needed help in one way or another. There was 1 or 2 or 3 or 6 or 10 angels. Whose angel am I going to be? Whose angel will you be? Well, with just one life, I could literally be another malach hachayim, another angel of life, to literally take a child, take a fetus, and rescue it from the grip of death and transport it into the loving embrace of life. Thank you very, very much.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.